A step in the right direction, a term often used by review outlets when they're covering the newest sports game that just got released. A step forward, a sign of hope for the future, that this is a foundational piece to build on and that there are some good things in here. That if the company continues to improve, this is a step in the right direction and the game will continually get better. But at what point do we move away from just a step in the right direction and hold the major corporations accountable for the quality of their games? The quality that is absolutely possible, that has been there previously, but for a variety of reasons has somewhat disappeared. Welcome back to State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts, and these are the scams of modern sports games. To set the scene a little bit, let's go back to when EA Sports College Football 25 was coming out. The excitement for it was unreal. It was something that really hadn't been seen, especially for an EA Sports game. And that was not only because of the long drought that there had been since the last NCAA football game, but because of the declining quality of the only other mainline AAA big budget football video game on the market in Madden NFL. And from everything that had been seen, it appeared as though this new college football game, it was actually going to have some passion put into it, and that it was going to be carefully crafted to be the best experience possible. And that is something that had not been seen in the Madden franchise for a long time now. Now, I'm sure the developers themselves work very, very hard, but in regards to the company as a whole, it feels like less and less passion has been pumped into the product over the years, and that there is an apathy that you can feel when you're playing the game. That this was not designed for the people who love football, who love the NFL, who want to experience it in every way possible, whether it is watching the primetime games, playing football with the guys, and then settling down at the end of the night to go play some Madden and have their own fun scenarios in something like a Madden franchise where they're running their own team. They are the coach. They are the GM. Something that so many people will never ever get the chance to experience in real life. They get to do it in Madden. It creates the opportunity. And there was a time when there were a lot of features available to you in that regard. But pretty much anywhere from the Xbox One / PS4 to the Xbox Series and the PS5 era, you take any football game, especially from that end on Madden's side, and it seems like it's less made to please those guys who are really fans of the game, and more so to please the shareholders. By cutting corners, not consistently doing much to the game year by year, and in doing so, seeking to maximize their profit. First of all, let's talk about that cutting corners part of it. And this really relates to the technical and the gameplay side of things. Technically, technology is more advanced than ever, and Madden NFL as a franchise is huge, and there's a big market for sports games, so this has a big budget. And year by year, there's not a lot of additions being made to the game. So in theory, that's going to give you time at the bare minimum to enhance your game, make sure it runs smoothly. But that really hasn't been the case. And that's down to cutting corners, and that's not on the developers, that's on the company itself for some time constraints. Because all sports video games, Madden is the one we've been focusing on, but 2K as well, they come out yearly. And so the game developers are constantly having to work. And in doing so, they don't always have time to polish and refine things to make sure that they work well when it ultimately gets in the user's hands. It's really noticeable in Madden, which is animation-based, which at times can make things look really smooth if you focus on just the animation of a tackle. But sometimes if you look at things leading up to that, the foundation of the game is a little bit shakier. Because in being animation-based as opposed to physics-based, things are going to have to tie in to make that animation work. Players are going to have to be in the right positions. And so there will be times where a player might have some distance on a player from the opposing team, where realistically there wouldn't be much of a chance at a tackle. This especially happens when the quarterback is facing a pass rush, and the offensive player will kind of get sucked into a tackle that otherwise wouldn't have happened in a physics-based game because the animation called for it. And animation-based stuff has its place, but this is the only simulation NFL game on the market. You're designing something that is supposed to simulate an authentic football experience. So having something more physics-based, even if the animations themselves look a little less smooth, because things can come from any position, that would do wonders for an actual authentic experience. And it really does seem like it has kind of gotten worse over the years, at least in terms of how it is perceived. Because yearly they market it as, oh, we've got new physics-based systems now, but the gameplay remains largely the same and largely animation-based. So it is kind of misleading to say that we've got new physics, because sure, you probably got some, but ultimately it still does kind of take away from the gameplay experience with all the animations that you have. So that's with the cutting corners and the worst gameplay. But there's another facet to cutting corners, and that is lost features. And once again, Madden is the primary offender of this. After Madden 12, they developed a new gameplay engine, and they left a lot of features behind that you could find in a lot of older games, but were now gone. And some of them have come back now, stuff like Create a Team, which I'll get into in a second, just recently came back in this year's Madden. And it was a feature that was really marketed as, hey, you can create your own team now. But it's something that had been in every game up until Madden 13. It was in 12, then it got removed in 13. So is it really a new feature if you just took it out of the game for so long, and it's something that fans had in the past, and you're just now bringing it back? And Create a Team in itself is something that can really enhance someone's experience, because I talked earlier about going into franchise mode and being your own GM, being your own head coach. And that's something that not a lot of people in the world are ever going to get to experience, especially on the biggest stage like the NFL. But something else super cool is that you might not have a team in your home state, especially in your hometown. And ultimately, that's probably going to be what you were drawn to most. You want to root for the locals. So imagine having a team in your own city, right? And you're able to create your own. And you can really develop a connection to that, and going out, playing every game, and hoping that they succeed, and doing all that you can with the game to make them succeed. Because you kind of have an attachment to it, because it's cool to see the team that you created go out there and win and compete with these legitimate NFL teams. And that's something that can just bring a lot of fans in and enhance their immersion to the game. And that's something that was lost for so long. Presentation as well is something that has really been lacking. And wanting to be like a sports journalist, a podcaster, presentation is kind of big for me. Because ultimately, one of these days I would love to do commentary for a sport and stuff of that sort. And Madden 25, a game made in 2024, has worse presentation than a game made in 2004 in ESPN NFL 2K5. Back in 2004, they were able to get the ESPN license and have not just more effective halftime segments than we have today, but introductions that set the tone of the game, and even stuff on the menu screen that can kind of give you a weekly recap in franchise mode. And that's stuff that is all gone today. And EA is one of the biggest game developers in the entire world. They could have the money to license in ESPN and NBC and have that presentation in their game. But they don't, due to a lack of true care for the polish of the game, the presentation of it, and apathy towards that. And ultimately greed, because that's going to affect their bottom line. Maybe they won't make as big a profit if they're spending money on this licensing. But ultimately the argument can kind of fall flat for them because of the money that they make as a corporation, and the fact that this is the only NFL game on the market. You can't go anywhere else to play NFL with, the current rosters, the current teams properly licensed. You can't go anywhere else. So people are going to buy the game regardless. And as a result, there's really not much of an excuse to pull punches and cut corners because you're going to make a profit at the end of the day regardless. And at that point, you're just kind of falling into some greed, which harms the player experience significantly for these features that you've left out, for the lacking presentation. And this would be one thing if, these features that they had left behind, that, they were coming up with new ones, though, to kind of make up for it and having their own presentation. Madden's presentation is very, very bland. And even if you compare it to NBA 2K blows it out of the water. And that's another giant corporation that at least innovates somewhat, and they have their own issues as well, which I will get into later. But they do at least put more care into the game than EA does with their Madden franchise, and it is clear to see. And this just brings me to my next point when I was talking about, the features that were gone. It would be different if they added features, but there was a lack of creativity as well. Because new stuff in Madden doesn't come around very often. Year in, year out, it feels more like a roster update than it does a true new game. And there's some stuff allowed, like they have made improvements to franchise mode, although it's still not as deep as that aforementioned ESPN NFL 2K5. And when they do make additions to franchise mode, it runs more poorly as well. You go back to, say, Madden 20, the franchise mode was not as in-depth as it is now. But you could move through tabs, you could get through the menus a lot easier than you can now. So even when you add stuff, it kind of harms the user experience. And that kind of falls back on your engine. But getting back to the features, there's not a lot of new features added. And when they do, often it's gone pretty soon if they realize that they can't make a lot of money off of it. I talked about Madden 20 earlier. I believe this was the first game that came in. That was Superstar KO. This was a game that you could play with your friends. And you would pick a coach, and you had choices of celebrities and NFL players that all had their different style of offense, all different teams with differing uniforms. And then you would draft a couple skill position players. And you would go play a quick game. But ultimately, there's not really a revenue source for that. There's no transactions you can do online that's going to make EA money from Superstar KO. And as a result, that's gone now. There is no Superstar KO. And that was a really fun game mode that quite a lot of people enjoyed. And in removing that, you really show that you are profit-driven. Because keeping the game in doesn't hurt much. You already added it. And you've had it for a couple of years now. But in removing it, the idea is to kind of draw players to these other modes where they're going to spend money. And it's very anti-consumer because you're not seeking out to make a fun experience. You're ultimately profit-driven. And it's okay to be profit-driven at the end of the day. You do have to make money from this. But you still are, and now you're just being driven by greed and a lack of dedication to your craft. And once again, I don't think this falls on the developers. I think that they're trying their hardest. But I feel like the corporation behind them at EA wants to make as much money from Madden as possible. So there is a lack of creativity when it comes to ideas that can make them money. Even when they add them, they ultimately get removed to draw people towards perhaps the biggest problem, and that is Ultimate Team. And we'll see it in 2K as well. These are essentially gambling. You spend your real-life money on virtual currency that you can use to buy packs of cards. And in these cards, there will be players. And then you can go out and you can play with those players. Now, in a vacuum, that is bad in itself. But then you add in the competitive side of it. And the fact that people who are willing to spend more money on the game are going to have the better team. And ultimately, skill can win out when you're playing these games against strangers for the most part. But the person who spends more money and gets more cards and better cards, higher rated players, is going to have the advantage every time. And so it creates a loop of where you have to consistently buy new cards just so that you have a chance to compete in this online mode that is heavily featured, heavily marketed, heavily advertised, that is designed to feel like a true experience, like the defining experience of the game, whether that is fair or not, which I would argue is not. It's kind of marketed that way, especially with Madden. You open up the menu, Ultimate Team's the first thing you see. You get pop-up ads for Ultimate Team. And Madden is especially bad because as the way the game currently stands, there are no historic teams. Say you're playing an exhibition, you're going to have to play with a current day NFL team. No chance of playing with old guys that you might have grew up watching. Just the guys who are out there now. But if you go to Ultimate Team, in those card packs, there are vintage players. So that encourages the player to continuously spend money so that they can play with these older players that they might have grown an attachment to. And that's very anti-consumer to play on nostalgia like that. And in NBA 2K's case, it's a little bit less egregious with my team. Although there have been events that they've got criticism for overpriced cards. But at the bare minimum with NBA 2K, you can play with historic teams without spending a dime on them in exhibition mode and in their version of the franchise mode, My League, where you can even go back and play in different eras. You can play back when Michael Jordan did and have all the rosters from back in the day. So there is some care put into NBA 2K, much more than Madden, and it shows that, there is a care and dedication that can be utilized to create good games. It's just a matter of corporate greed and how that is utilized. And Madden is the worst example of that. They cut corners. They have a worse gameplay experience with their animations, even though they advertise year after year that physics-based gameplay is here, when really that can only make up kind of a small margin of the gameplay. They remove features that don't make enough money for them, market these new ideas like Create a Team as those new ideas when they were a feature that was just removed for a long time. And ultimately, is anything going to change? Probably not, especially with Madden, because EA has the exclusive simulation NFL license. They are the only ones that can make NFL simulations. Games that are supposed to reflect the real NFL. Games that are supposed to be an authentic and accurate representation of the game, when so often they aren't. But EA consistently makes money off of that alone because no one else on the market even gets a chance to compete. And so year after year, if you want to be in tune with the current game, and here's another thing they'll do, they will shut down rosters, or they will shut down servers after a couple of years, so you can't download updated rosters that someone might have made. And it kind of forces you into buying the new game to play with an updated roster. They would do all that they can to make sure that you buy this newest game because they know at the end of the day you don't really have another choice. And so until they lose that license, there's not really anything that's going to be done. And we can get steps in the right direction. But what is that direction? What are we actually leading to? What is the actual progress being made? That's where the real questions are. Not are there marginal improvements, but what do these marginal improvements mean for the betterment of the game, for more pro-consumer practices? And that's where it's really lacking. And ultimately that license probably is going to stick with EA because regardless of the criticism that Madden can receive, they make money off of it once again because there's no other options. And there is obvious potential because I talked about NBA 2K, how that can be a good example at times of some innovation. Adding in different eras into their franchise mode, playing with historic teams. EA with Madden, the company that creates Madden, has shown that they can innovate, and we saw it with college football. That was a big, big game, and it had some of the best gameplay that we've seen in years from a football game from them. And it was this really exciting prospect of a college football game because of the opportunities that it could create for some innovation. And they went out there and they did a pretty good job with it. So there's still absolutely talent on this development team. But the corporation that is backing it so often cuts corners when they know that they can because they don't have any competition, anything that's going to stop them. They know that people are going to have to buy the game regardless of the quality of it and regardless of the criticism that it may receive. And they can continue to put out a subpar project with clear apathy and a clear lack of polish, clear lack of innovation year after year. And ultimately, they're going to make a big profit out of it, and they're going to please their shareholders, and it's going to look like they're doing better than ever. Because you, the consumer, regardless of the practices that are instilled in the game, from advertising Ultimate Team around every corner to removing features, you as a consumer, you have to buy it regardless if you want to stay involved in that scene. And that is a scam of modern sports games, and especially Madden NFL. That is all for today's episode of State of the Association. Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Nash Roberts.